In this video, I'm going to talk about how to get that muted, rubbery bass tone that is reminiscent of bands like the Beatles or modern groups like Tame Impala. That tone that's really mid-range forward and punchy. There's a few things to know about getting it that involve both the recording side and the mixing side. To demonstrate this technique, I'm going to use my song Tidal Waves. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is to get this sound, it's best to use flat wound strings. They sort of instantly get you like 80% of the way there to this tone. And if you can't afford to get new strings and you just have round wound strings, what you can do in a pinch is heavily palm mute your playing. This will reduce the sustain and give you that punchiness that's very reminiscent of this tone, and kind of make up for the fact that you don't have flat wound strings on your bass. But I have flat wound set up on this. It's a fairly cheap bass, but it works well. Another important aspect of this tone is what pickup you're using. So just as an example, I'll play the bridge pickup so you can hear how that sounds. And then the blend of the two. And then just the middle pickup. And so that's what I like best. I always go for the pickup that's kind of furthest from the bridge. It can be cool to get a more nasally tone, but I tend to like the rounder sound that almost sounds kind of like an upright bass. One of the songs that I reference for this is Taxman by the Beatles. And so that was the tone that I was really chasing when I was kind of working on the bass line for my song Tidal Waves. Another important consideration is what pick you're using. In general, I like to use my fingers. I find that sounds perfect like 90% of the time. So here's an example playing with my fingers. But a pick can also be really cool if you want a more percussive sound. Here's an example of that. And some players, especially if you're a guitar player primarily, might just want to use a pick but still want more of that muted sound, in which case you can use a felt pick and it gives you a really unique tone that has a very soft attack. This is actually one that's great for like indie folk music and stuff like that. So here's how that sounds. My last tip for recording is I like to record with a little bit of compression before I add any processing later. I have an 1176 clone, and so I'll do 3 to 4 dB of compression on the way in. But if you don't have that, just put a compressor first in your plugin chain before you add an amp sim or whatever processing you're going to use. This will just rein in the dynamics a little bit so that the amp sim or whatever saturation you're using responds more evenly to the performance. All right, so let's jump into the mixing side of this. So I'll play just the raw DI tone as I recorded it first. So that's the basic tone that I started with. And the first thing I wanted to do was basically create an amp tone. So you can obviously use amp sims for this. One of my favorites for this kind of retro bass tone is using the Ampeg B15. I think Brainworks and Universal Audio have versions of that. It sounds just amazing right off the bat. When I mixed this song, I don't think I had that plugin yet, so I just kind of created my own amp tone using saturation. So I'll show you how that works here. So first off, let's hear how just the saturation sounds. So I turned it off and on there, and you can hear immediately all the mid-range that sort of comes forward because it's primarily saturating the mid-range. So I have a multi-band exciter. I'm using the tube mode, and it's split about 330 hertz. So everything above that is getting saturated pretty heavily, and then I have it about 50% mix. And another important part of this is this high EQ. Everything above 3.5K is being attenuated with a shelf. And so this gives you that amp-like effect where you don't get a bunch of fizzy distortion in the high end. It kind of gently rolls off and gives you a more mid-range focused tone. And then in the low end, I have a little bit of the warm saturation setting. So it's really subtle. It's not like crunching it up. It's just giving it a little bit of that natural saturation compression that you would get from an amp. Next, I added a little EQ. So let's hear how that sounds. I'm actually going to start with it off. Off. So this is just emphasizing that character more. It's really leaning more into the mid-range, boosting it, 1K and 1.6K about. So that's really the sweet spot for this tone, is that 700 hertz to 1.6 kilohertz area really gives you that mid-range presence that makes this tone work. I also boosted a little bit more low end and scooped a little bit of mid-range. Even though this is a very mid-range forward sound, often around 300 hertz to 400 hertz can get really cloudy sounding. And so this just helps preserve clarity. And then last is just a low end compressor, just compressing everything below 130 hertz to keep it even. Here's without. So it's really just keeping the bass tone with a heavy amount of low end underneath it at all times, just keeping that really consistent sounding. There you go. That's kind of the first step to really bring this tone maybe 95% of the way there. And then the next step is to add a little bit of punchy compression. So in this case, I'm using the DBX, which gives you just a really cool emphasis on the transient of the bass performance. Because like I said, another part of this tone that's important is it feeling really punchy. So let's start with this turned off and I'll turn it on. So you can feel the impact of those transients just a little bit more. This is a more subtle setting, but it just helps it kind of move a little bit further in that direction. Here's how it sounds with the whole rhythm section. And it's not the tightest performance in the world, but I liked it. I feel like some of that imperfection gives it some charm. Next, really in this plugin chain, this was just a little bit of tweaking to just make sure everything feels right in the mix. So nothing too crazy here, just boosting a little more low end, reducing a little bit of low mids, and rolling off some more sub frequencies. And then a little bit of ducking with the kick drum. This is a pretty low-end heavy mix, so this helps just make a little bit more room for that subby kick to kind of punch through. But that's it. That makes the bass sound. It's really about that saturation to the mid-range. EQ, really boosting that 700 hertz to 1.6 kilohertz range to get that sort of nasally mid-range presence, and then some punchy compression. I'll also use 1176 or sometimes a Fairchild to get that punchy compression, but in this case, the DBX did the job. So hopefully that helps you when you're chasing this tone. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this was helpful for you and inspires you to go and make music for yourself.